First of all, Mazel and Brocha. I'm sure I'm expressing everybody's wishes that you should have Nachas and Deris Yishar Mevorach. If you could bench that the HaRav know that you have should go over to Yitzet Zainu V'Tzetzoya Amcha Beis Yisrael.
Amen. The Mira family, the other Zayd is Kupelwasser, which are the Zayd of Chaim's a Talmud of Nachum. We learned together by Rav Nachum many years ago. So.
You only have Nachas and Simchas. Should I wait till 12 o'clock for the Olam to come on?
As I said, maybe if you want to Magdam a second, we're all anxious to hear some different chizuk of what a thrill it is to have the yeshiva opening up. We have some of your Gardumim here in the various places in the tri-state area, but I heard from you and I heard from Rav Shiva of Les Yudel, what a great exciting thing it is to have the Bachram back. So share this for a minute until Ellen comes on.
I'll only say one thing, that usually at this time of the day, I'm down in En Gedi. I said sheer early when it cools 100, 105 degrees there usually. So I usually wait till the evening, which is now, to say sheer live over there in En Gedi. I go down there every day. And so it's like 95 and not 105. But today, because we have the Yerach HaEysonim, I said sheer in the morning. But I would just say one thing as we wait till we start on time, that people say the door is a shvacha door and this and that, and there never was such a door. All I know is that I pull up to En Gedi every day at 6:30 Israeli time, and it's minimal 95 degrees, and I'm watching tens of boys sitting on porches waiting for shir. The Gemaras are open, the pens are in their hands, they're sitting in 95-degree weather in solitary confinement with 3 other boys in a room. It's true that they do talk over the porch from one porch to another, but that's about it. That's not a great cultural life. They haven't stepped out of their room for a week. They signed on for 2 weeks. They're sitting and learning a whole day. I get questions a whole day. And I think it's a Kiddush Hashem, and it's a sign that maybe the door is not so bad, and maybe there's still hope. Because that's the scene that I face every day at 6:30 evening when I drive in from the desert. I see 3 floors of porches and boys sitting there with their Gemaras open, waiting for shir. And I stand outside and I say shir, and all the other Magidi Shurim are the same thing. It's an incredible sight to see. It's not something that brings tears to my eyes every day. And it just shows that the Messiah that we have from our parents and grandparents, who were really Moisei Nefesh for Torah and for Avodas Hashem and for mitzvahs, somehow drip down into the DNA of the kids. It's not somehow, it's not an accident, but it's there, it's live, and it's kicking, and it's something that we should as a collectively be proud of, because that's the very good side of what we're all about. And the message of Sinai there's a reason why it's gotten through, that even though the door is taka a crazy door, but Yiddish kinder still sit in the desert and learn. And they get mun from the Mir Yeshiva 3 times a day. Anane HaKavod we don't have yet, so they have to iron their shirts, but the everything else is taken care of them as mamash a bechina like that, and it's incredible to see.
Okay, Reshi, we're ready to go.
Okay. Shalom Aleichem to everybody. The truth is, I'm not sure if you heard the Hakdama from a real Talmud Chacham. I'm not sure you need to hear from me, but so I'll do Chazorah on the Hakdama share, and maybe that'll be it to Ellis. The Avnei Miluyim brings down, as you heard from the Rav before, the Avnei Miluyim brings down a Magen Avram, who says something which is relatively simple, very, very poshut. Now, the Miluyim brings down a Magen Avram. The Magen Avram says that since we have a din that Esrog Dalan Minim has to be Lochem, so if a person steals an Esrog from a guy, the Shitas HaYireim is that even though Gezel Akum is mutter, but it's not yours. In other words, something which is very reasonable. There's no Isser of Gezel, but the guy wasn't makne the Esrog to you. And since the guy wasn't makne the Esrog, so there's no reason why it should be called Lochem. And therefore the Magen Avram says in Tafresh Lamed Zayin, the Afilu L'man Diyamar Gzeloi Mutter Lochem Lohevi. That's the famous Yereim who says that, albeit it's true that a guy, you're allowed to steal from a guy, but the chayfetz that you stole from him doesn't become yours. At Kan Divi Morgan Avraham. Now the Morgan Avraham seems to be saying something which is very reasonable and very poshut, by the way, and very simple. He's right. Gezel Akum just takes away the Isser of the Lesigzol. You're allowed to take it, you're allowed to eat it, you're allowed to consume it, but it's not yours. And by Dalad Minim, we know that there's a requirement that has to be yours. The Gemara says in Daf Mem Aleph, Amid Beis, we'll talk about it soon, that Hashol v'Hagozel, anything which is borrowed, anything which is stolen, so a person is not Yotzei Mitzvah, which says, L'kachtam Lochem. Now the Mulim argues on the Magen Avraham, and he argues in a very interesting way, and he starts off with a steer in the Rambam, and as a result of the steer in the Rambam, the Avnei Miluim is mechadish, an incredible chiddush. It's not such a well-known chiddush, but Avnei Miluim is mechadish, an incredible chiddush, based on the steeras Rambam, or because of the steeras Rambam, that is mamash changes the rules of the whole inyan of Dalad Minim, the whole inyan of Lochem. What's the stira? The Rambam Paskins in Perek Ches Halacha Beis in Hilchos Lulav, the Rambam Paskins that Meiser Sheni B'Yushalayim in not all kosher. The bottom line is the Rambam Paskins in Perek Ches Halacha Beis Hilchos Lulav that if a person has Meiser Sheni, he has a Sheni Esrik, which is Meiser Sheni, he could be Yetzer with it. Frek the Avnei Miluim, the obvious question, that it's a stira to the Rambam in Perek Gimel Hilchos Meiser Sheni Halacha Yud Zayin. The Rambam Paskins in Perek Gimel Halacha Yud Zayin Hilchos Meiser Sheni Meiser Sheni Momon Gavoyahu Shenemar Lashem. So the Rambam Paskins like Reb Meir in Kedushin, who holds that Meiser Sheni is Momon Gavoya. That's the Rambam in Perek Gimel Hilchos Meiser Sheni Halacha Yud Zayin. Now, if it's Ma'aseh Sheni Mamon Gavoya, the Gemara speaks out in a number of places in Shas that if it's Mamon Gavoya, so it's not yours and you can't be Merkadosh a lady with it, you can't sell it, etc. And primarily you can't be Merkadosh a lady with it. So the Avnei Miluim in Siman Chav Ches Gimel asks a steeras Rambam. The Rambam Paskins in Hilchos Lulav Perek Ches Halacha Beis that a person has Ma'aseh Sheni in Yerushalayim, which we'll see why in a second, you can be Yetzer with it. It's a direct stira, it's a point blank stira. The Rambam Paskins in Ma'aseh Sheni, Perek Gimel Halacha Yud Zayin, that Ma'aseh Sheni is Mamon Gavoya, and the Gemara says that if Ma'aseh Sheni is Mamon Gavoya, you can't be Merkadosh a lady with it because it's not yours. A point blank stira, it's not Lochem. As I fact, Avnei Miluim, a point blank stira in the Rambam. So the Avnei Miluim is going to say a very creative teretz to resolve the stira of the Rambam. And as a result of the teretz that Avnei Miluim says to answer the Rambam, as a result of the teretz that Avnei Miluim is going to say to answer the Rambam, he's going to argue on the Magen Avraham, and Avnei Miluim over here in Siman Chav Ches of Kohen Gimel is going to lay down an entire new set of rules, for Hilchos Lochem for Dalad Minim. Says Avnei Miluim as follows: what's taka the teretz and the steeras of Rambam? If the Rambam Paskins in Perek Gimel Hilchos Ma'aseh Sheni Halacha Yud Zayin that Ma'aseh Sheni is Mamon Gavoya, which means that it's not yours. So how could a person use it for Dalad Minim? It's not Lochem. So to Avnei Miluim, a tremendous chiddush, and the chiddush is based on a Gemara on the Daf Lamed Aleph. To make a long story short, what Avnei Miluim basically says is, believe it or not, is that a person does not have to own. A person doesn't have to have momonistic bailus on the Dalad Minim in order for it to be called Lochem, because the criteria for Lochem is in an entirely different criteria. You don't have to own it. Where did Avnei Miluim take it from? Avnei Miluim took it from a Gemara on Daf Lamed Aleph. The Gemara took it Daf Lamed Aleph has a discussion over there. Why is Orla apostle? Why can't a person use Orla for the Dalad Minim? The Gemara says two pshatim. One pshat is because she'ein bo heter achila, you're not allowed to eat it. And the other pshat is if she'ein bo din mammon, you don't have general usages of it. It has no value. The Gemara evolves, and I'm not going to go through the whole Gemara now, but the evolution of the Gemara over there on Daf Lamed Hem and Aleph is that there's a new criteria called Heter Achila for Lochem. So Orla, which is not edible, which is also Ba'achila, therefore it's lacking in Lochem. Continues the Gemara and says that if the criteria for Lochem is whether it's edible or not. So the Gemara says on Daf Lamed Hem and Aleph, and I quote, Ika benayu ma'aser sheni shebiyushalayim aliba de Reb Meir. The mandiyama lafisha ein bo heter achila harei yesh bo heter achila. That's the bomb Gemara in Sukkah Daf Lamed Hem and Aleph. The Gemara says in Sukkah Daf Lamed and Aleph that an orla is puzzled for dalad minim because it doesn't have a heter achila, it's not edible. Says the Gemara, vice versa, if I find you something that is edible, it's called lochem. And the Gemara says, I'll give you an example of something which is edible but doesn't have financial value, doesn't have financial ownership. What's that? Ma'aser sheni b'Yerushalayim aliba de Reb Meir. Now, Ma'aser sheni aliba de Reb Meir is Mamon Gavoya. In Yerushalayim, it's edible. Says the Gemara, if the criteria for lochem is edibility, if it's edible, if it's heter achila, so then it's called lochem. If the criteria is what the Gemara calls din mammon, where you have to own it or have a financial vested interest in it, so then the Gemara says it's no good. Says the Avnei Miluim. So I have in front of me in the Gemara in Daf Lamed Hem and Aleph an entire new world that opened up in front of me. I have a Gemara that said that if a person has Ma'aser Sheni b'Yerushalayim, let's break it down to the molecules. According to Reb Meir, aliba de Reb Meir, it's Mamon Gavoya, so it's not yours. So why is it called lochem? The Gemara says heter achila. Heter achila is what defines lochem. Says the Avnei Miluim, something very blunt and very simple, which at first glance seems to be very reasonable because what he seems to be saying is a mefurish Gemara. Says the Avnei Miluim, so what does it say in this Gemara? That you can have something which you don't own, Mamon Gavoya. You can have something which you don't own, it's Mamon Gavoya, and yet it's called lochem because it's edible, because it has a heter achila. So the criteria for lochem is not ownership, it's not bailus. Lochem means you can utilize it. You can have usage out of it. It's heter achila. That's called lochem. That's called you have shaykhs to it. Ad kan divrei Avnei Miluim. So Avnei Miluim is quoting a Gemara that seems to completely and absolutely change the rules of the definition of what's called lochem. And the Gemara gives the prime example of that. The prime example is Ma'aser Sheni b'Yerushalayim aliba de Reb Meir, where it's Mamon Gavoya, where financially you don't own it, you don't have bailus on it. And yet, according to the Mandiyamar over there, who holds that it's totally in achila, it's called lochem. Says the Avnei Miluim. So I have a mefurish Gemara that says that for the criteria of lochem by dalad minim, I do not need you to have financial ownership. I do not need you to have bailus. As long as you have a heter achila, it's called lochem. It's called you have usage. Says the Heilig Avnei Miluim. If that's true, so then I have a simple teretz on the Stiras Rambam. The Rambam paskins that Ma'aser Sheni is Mamon Gavoya, so it's not lochem. How could he paskin in Hilchos Lulav that a person could utilize Ma'aser Sheni for dalad minim? Says the Heilig Avnei Miluim, why are you asking a steer on the Rambam? It's a mefurish Gemara. The Gemara says explicitly that Ma'aser Sheni is Mamon Gavoya, but if it's edible, it's called lochem. The answer to the steers of Rambam is that, albeit it's true that Ma'aser Sheni is Mamon Gavoya, and it's not yours, Mamon is wise, but Ma'aser Sheni b'Yerushalayim is edible, and for the din of lochem, for the rules of lochem, all you need is that it should be edible. That's the answer on the steer of the Rambam. And what he really means to say is that the Rambam is quoting a Gemara. The Rambam paskins like that Mandi Omar. What he means to say is that the Rambam paskins like that Mandi Omar, that explicitly says in the Gemara that even though it's Mamon Gavoya or a mayor, even though it's not yours, even though you don't own it, even though it's not lochem in the typical sense of the understanding, but if it's edible, that is called lochem. That's enough lochem to be called lochem. Therefore, there's no steer in the Rambam. Atkan divrei avnim luim. Therefore, says the avnim luim now. So what I'm walking out of this Gemara on Sukkot Daf Lamed Hey, and out of this Rambam, is that a person doesn't have to own the Daled Minim. Because in Ma'aseh Sheni, Mama Gavoy, you don't own it. It's edible. So Lochem is B'chlal, not totally in ownership at all. Therefore says Avnim Eluyim, so he comes along and drops his bomb. Sok Avnim Eluyim. So now that I proved both from the Gemara and Daf Lamed Hey, and from the halacha of the Rambam, halacha l'maisa, that a person doesn't have to own the Daled Minim. Rather, lochem doesn't mean ownership. Lochem means edibility. I have a usage out of it. There's no reason in the world why a person who stole from an akum, Daled Minim, even if the Yereim is right, that Gezel akum is mutter, but it's not yours, here it drops to Avnim Luim, the bomb, Daled Minim don't have to belong to you. Daled Minim don't have to belong to you. All it needs is edibility. When a guy steals from a guy, since there's no Isser of Gzeil, he's allowed to eat it. It might not be his, but it's certainly edible. Kitzer, to say it very bluntly, stealing an item from a guy, even if the item is not mine, it's no worse than Ma'aseh Sheni Mamon Gavoya, as long as it's edible. That's the game changer, that Avnim William changed all the rules and criteria of Lochem. A person doesn't have to own it. All you have to do is to have edibility. That's why Ma'aseh Sheni Mamon Gavoya is kosher for a Daled Minim. And likewise, Mamon that you stole from a guy, albeit it's true it's not yours, but it's permissible to eat, that's enough to be called Lochem. The first question that one has to ask is, that Haloi, the Gemara says in Daf Mem Aleph Amud Beis, the famous Gemara. The Gemara says that it's a Mishnah, and the Gemara says over there, Lochem, we shall lochem lohitzis hashol ves hagozl mikan omru chachomim ein adam yetzi dechavose beyond division shechag bu dolovish hachaveroi. Haloi, the famous Gemara says in Daf Mem Aleph Amud Beis that a person can't be yetzi with shol and gozel. So according to the Avnim Buyim, one has no choice but to say, and this is, by the way, the Iker change in the whole Masechta. The Avnim Buyim will have to learn that the reason why shol, something which is borrowed, something which is stolen, can't be used for the mitzvah Daled Minim, is not because you lack ownership, the way we understood till this minute. The reason why you can't be Yaitse is because it's not edible, shocking as it sounds. The din of shol and gozel is because it's not edible. You borrowed something, you're not allowed to eat it. You stole something, you're not allowed to eat it. And the reason why shol and gozel is not yetza is because it's not lochem, but not because you don't own it, but rather because it's not edible. There's no choice, by the way. The Avnim Buyim hold you don't have to own it. So when the Gemara says that shol and gozel is possible, the reason is because it's not edible. Atkan divrei ha'avnim Buyim with all its mechudesh dikkur glory. It's a little bit strange. I'm not asking you a kasha yet. I'm going to ask now 4 kashas. But it's a little bit strange that, as far as I know, in none of the Rishonim, I repeat, none of them, does it appear that the din of shol and gozel, the reason why you're not yetzer with them is because it's a lack of eating. Nobody connects the Gemara in Mem Aleph Amud Beis, the Gemara which says that lochem, that you can't be yetzer with a shol and a gozel. Nobody connects it to the din of Isser Achila of the Gemara and Daf Lamed Hey and Aleph. Nobody connects the two sugyas. But according to the Avnim Buyim, that's what has to come out. That the reason why a person can't be yetzer with shol and gozel is not because he doesn't own it, because it's not edible. I want to discuss a number of kashas, and the final kasha is a raya muchachas, not like the Avnim Buyim, at least pshat in the Rambam. Perhaps in the Gemara it's a raya, but in the Rambam, the pshat that Avnim Buyim says can't be the pshat. A raya muchachas she'eino le'tshuva. I want to begin the journey of touching at various nekudas of this tremendous, huge chiddush of the Avnim Buyim from Kama v'Kama Tztaldim. We'll go Keseder. The first question is a huge question, but last night as I was preparing for the shir, it was nischadish for me a pashat teretz on the kasha, which I want to share with you, but then I have 2 more questions which don't have 3 more questions which don't have answers. And the final question, question number 4, is a raya muchachas. So we'll go Kesed. I'm going to put down now 4 questions on the derech of the Avnim Buyim. And we'll get to the fourth question, which is the Raya Muchachas, and then in Mitzvah Hashem, we're going to present a different mahalach in the sugya. Question number one is, and you heard about this in the introduction by the Rav Shlita. There's a sugya later on Daf Mem Aleph. The Ikar is the sugya in Kedushin Davov. The sugya of Matana Manas Lahachzer. A person Reuven gave Shimon Esrog Matana, but Manas Lahachzer. The Tanai that he gives it back. The bottom line is that it's a temporary present because the Matana was given with a built-in limitation. It's not important now, the lumdus of Matana Manas Lahachzer. The bottom line is that the Matana was given with a time limitation of how long it could stay by the recipient. One is a shayla where the Matana Manas Lahachzer is called Lochem or not. More over here in Mem Aleph, Gemara in Kedushin Davov. I have a very, very simple question. The Gemara says in Kedushin Davov, for example, that the din of Matana Manas Lahachzer, whether or not I give somebody an esrog in a tzura of Matana Manas Lahachzer, whether it's called Lochem or not, that's dependent on the international shayla of Matana Manas Lahachzer, Shmo Matana or not. That's what the Gemara says. So I have a very simple and brutal question, which l'chayra is a raya muchachas against Avnei Miluyim, but I have a teretz on it, which is probably the emes of teretz. I don't understand. I have a very simple question. When a person gives a matana manas lahachzer to somebody else, l'chayra, how could it be a tzad that a person could use it for esrog? Although he's not allowed to eat it. The Gemara says in Daf Lamed Hey that something which is not edible can't be used for esrog. That's a fact. Whether the lumdus of the Avnei Miluyim is true or not, this is what we're discussing. But the din is true that something which is not edible can't be used for a daled minim. So if I give a matana manas lahachzer to somebody, how does the whole sugya of matana manas lahachzer even begin? The recipient can't eat it because if he eats it, he won't be able to give it back. The answer is, obviously, that's not called an isser achila. Isser achila means that the chayfetz itself, mitzad atzmo, is not edible. If I gave you an object that the object itself is edible, that there happens to be a outside tanai which causes that you won't be able to eat it, that's not called an isser achila. So the first thing is we have to discuss is that b'chlal, in the whole topic of matana manas lahachzer, shmo matana, or lo shmo matana, obviously it's called that it's edible, because if it wouldn't be called edible, so then the whole sugi doesn't get off the ground. Okay. So when I give a matana manas lahachzer, obviously it's called edible. So I have a huge kasha on the Avnei Miluyim. I don't understand. How could there be a sugya of esrog of matana manas lahachzer, shmo matana or not shmo matana? If it's not edible, so something which is not edible can't be used for lulav and esrog daled minim. If it is edible, Avnei Miluyim said that anything which is edible you can be yaitza with. So what do I care if matana manas lahachzer, shmo matana or not? And that's a catastrophic kasha on the Avnei Miluyim. How could Avnei Miluyim come along and say that anything which is edible, that's enough of a relationship with the object, that's enough of a connection to the object to be called lachem, even though you don't own it at all? So when I give a matana manas lahachzer, if it's not edible, then there's nothing to talk about. And if it is edible, so that's enough to be called lachem. So then what's the shayla of matana manas lahachzer, shmo matana or not shmo matana? What do I care if it's called a matana, it's called mine or not called mine? Who cares? That's an incredible kasha on the Avnei Miluyim. But this kasha that I just asked, I have a way of answering in an emes way. I don't want to go into it at length because it touches at the heart of the sugya, but I heard that the Rav Shlita read the Rambam beforehand. So this kasha I can get away. The next kasha is I can't. The simple understanding of the sugya of matana manas lahachzer is that when Reuven gives Shimon something for a limited amount of time, so the pasuk shot is that he received it, it's his. Just since it only has a limited amount of time, the question is that enough to be called lochem? I repeat again. The simple understanding of the sugya of matana manas lahachzer is that if I give you something with a time limit built in, which is what a matana manas lahachzer is getting something in a temporary way enough to be called lochem. But if you would ask me, during the temporary time, is it mine? Yes. Just the question is whether that's enough ownership that it can be called lochem. That's the pashta and simple understanding of what matana manas lahachzer means. The Rambam is mashma not like that. The Rambam in Hilchos Chia, Perek Gimel Halacha Tes, says something astounding. The Rambam in Perek Gimel Hilchos Chia Halacha Tes says, "Hanaisim matana manas lahagzir, harezu matana." It is a matana, period. And what's the nafkamina? Va'oichel peres calls mana matana. You're allowed to eat the peres. Now this Rambam raised a red flag. What do you mean? Hanaisim matana manas lahagzir, harezu matana. And what's the nafkamina that you're allowed to eat the peres? Nobody ever had a question whether during the duration of the matana, whether or not I can eat the pears. The question was whether something that I only got for a limited amount of time, is it enough for dalad minim for lachem? Is it enough to be mekadosh a lady? Is it enough for pidyon haben? But the etzem matana itself was never a topic. I gave a matana, it's yours. Just I only gave it to you with a time limit built in. The Rambam in Perek Gimel Hilchos Chia Matana made an announcement. Matana Shma Matana. It's called a Matana. What do you mean? Lagabi what? Of course I know that it's yours. Is it chiddush that you're allowed to eat the pears? Of course you're allowed to eat the pears. The question is, when I give you something that you're allowed to eat the pears for a limited amount of time, is that enough for A? Is that enough for B? Is that enough for C? But the etzem chiddush that I'm allowed to eat the pears during the duration of the time that it's by me, l'chayr is not a chiddush at all. Rabbi Seinu taught us that in this Rambam state that the topic of matana manas lahachzir is not, is it enough for lachem? The topic of matana manas lahachzir is it a matana at all? Or if I give you something for a limited amount of time, that's not called a matana, that's called borrowing, that's not called giving. And then you never got usage bichlal. I'm referring now to the person who's sending in the, what do you call it? Exactly, correct. The reply from the two Chashuv members was what I was going to say. You can't eat it because of the Tanai, but mitzad the etzem bailos, I have a right to eat it. B'kitzur, what I want to say is that from this Rambam Perek Gimel Halacha Tes in Hilchos Chia Matana, I see an astounding thing. That the agenda of Matana Masach Shema Matana is a limited Matana enough to be called Lachem. Rather, a limited Matana, is it called a Matana or is it called borrowing? I'm going to say it very bluntly. If Matana Masach Shema Matana, you can't eat it because you never got it. I just lent it to you. I never gave it to you because there's no such thing as a matana for a limited time if I hold matana masach matana. Now this is again against the common accepted wisdom. The common accepted wisdom is that when I give something for a limited amount of time, there's no question that for that amount of time it's yours. Just the question is, since it came with a shelf life and it came with a limited amount of time, whether that's enough for all types of criterias of lachem and kedusha isha, etc. But for the period of time that you got it, certainly it's yours. So then I go back to my mamanashach. You can eat it or you can't eat it. If you can't eat it, so then there's nothing to talk about. And if you could eat it, so that's all I need according to Avnim Elohim. But in this Rambam, I see that it's not shroud Avnim Elohim. Because this Rambam says that in this Rambam I see, no, it's not like borrowing mammon. No. I lent an object. We're talking about giving an object. When you borrow an object, you have to give back the object. What I see from this Rambam is that the agenda of matana masach shema matana or not, is it enough for lachem, but rather, did I give you anything or not? And if I didn't give you anything, the Rambam says you can't eat the pears, by the way, even in the period of time while it's there, because it's not yours. What is it? Because there is no such phenomenon as giving a matana for a limited amount of time. If that's true, so then what I have in front of me over here, Rabbi Isai, is a Rambam who says that the issue of matana masach is it called gigebin, not whether it's called lachem, whether or not a limited time matana is enough yours or not. But the question is whether b'chlal it's called you got it at all. Okay, so then I have a teretz on the Avnim Elohim. The Avnim Elohim came along and said that what? That the criteria for lachem of dalad minim is not ownership, or rather it's whether you're allowed to eat it or not. So I asked an incredible kasha. So what is it totally matana masach shema matana or not? Decide. If you're not allowed to eat it, nothing to talk about. And if you're allowed to eat it, it's a vada good. The answer is that alone is the shayla. That alone is the shayla, whether or not matana manas lahachzir. That alone is the shayla, whether matana manas lahachzir is called a matana or not. That alone is the shaila. The shaila is not whether it's enough for ownership. The shaila is b'chal whether I gave you anything, or whether there's such a phenomenon as giving something for a short amount of time. Or if I give something for a short amount of time, that itself is not called giving. That's called borrowing, and that itself is the shorish of the shaila. So then it's very geshmak. If you'll ask me, no, are you allowed to eat it or are you not allowed to eat it? The answer is that alone is the shaila. Matana ma'asla shema matana or not. If it's lo shema matana, then you're not allowed to eat it because you never got it. It's only borrowed. That answers question 1 on the Ktsois. By the way, if I don't learn like that, then I learned the common accepted pshat in Matar Mas Lahavzer that it's given, just the question is whether it's enough for Lachem. So it's a raya against the Ktsois. Question number 2 that I have on Avim Ulim, same person. Question number 2 that I have is, which I don't even know how to deal with, because I couldn't find anybody who asks it. The Gemara says in Daf Mevavim Beis, the famous Gemara, that you should be very careful on the first day of Yom Tov not to be makne a dalad minim to a child, because the child is able to be koinet, right? Tasacher is makne you koinet, but he's not able to be makne it back. I repeat, the Gemara says that you should not be makne your dalad minim to a child on the first day of Yom Tov, the Gemara Mevavim Beis, because the child is able to be koinet, but he's not able to be koinet it back. So the question is, I don't understand. The kid was kainet. Okay, let's say that's a makna, either the Rabbanan or the Raisa, the famous Machlokes Rashi Tosfos. But after the kid was kainet, the kid said, Tati, you can go ahead and give it. So I don't understand. The father's allowed to eat it, or the father's not allowed to eat it? What are you going to tell me? The kid can't give reshus to the father to eat it once he's kaina? I don't know what's going on over here in the Gemara. The Gemara says that you can't be making it to the, you should not be making it to the kid, because the kid is kind of, but he can't be making it back. What do I need to be making it back? According to Avim, I don't need to be mine. All I need is that I'm allowed to eat it. So the kid can't give permission for you to eat it. That's what the Gemara means over there. Why can't the kid give permission to eat? A child can't say, I don't mind if you eat it. A child who owns something, and the child says, B'vakasha, you can eat it. It's called gzela. You're not allowed to eat it? Of course you are. So I don't understand the Avnim Ulim. How's he going to learn this Gemara? What does the Gemara say? That if you give something, you should not be making the dalad minim to the child, because the child is going to be kainet, because the asacher is making it, but he won't be able to be making it back. What do I need to be making it back for? I don't need lochem. I don't need ownership. All I need is rishus to eat it. Now, either you have rishus to eat it or you don't have rishus to eat it. By the way, by the same token, what have to be making it to the kid for, by the way? Just let the kid eat it. There's a double catastrophe in that Gemara. I don't know what to do with it. I'm afraid to ask such a kasha on the Avnim Bluyim who were not even dust under his feet. Why be making it to the kids? Let the kid eat the esrog, so it's called lochem. And why does the kid have to be making it back to you? Let the kid give it to you to eat. I don't know from both sides of this Gemara, how it stems with the Avnim Bluyim set of rules that you don't have to own it. All you have to do is have rishus to eat it. So let the father give the kid rishus to eat it. Let the kid give rishus to the father. I don't understand the Gemara over there. What do you be making it to the kid for? Broke out a famous Machlokes Rashi Tosfos, whether das acher is making it works or it doesn't work. There I said, what's going on over there? It's all about eating. It's about rishus to eat. It's not better than Gezalakum. It's a Meforsha Gemara L'choira, not like the Avnim B'lim. Over here, I don't have a teretz. In Matana Mas Lahavzer, I can say big tifa raid in the Gedam of Matana Mas Lahavzer. But this is a Meforsha Gemara that says you need a Haknah one way, you need a Haknah back. According to Avnim B'lim, what do I need Haknahs for on the first day? All I need is that the guy's allowed to eat it. If you're allowed to eat it, good. If you're not allowed to eat it, not allowed to eat it. I don't know what to do with this Gemara. It's a Pella Otza Mamish. I would just tell you a Marmokum, which, since I forgot to send it on the Marmokumis, so I'm not allowed to speak about it. But I would suggest that the Olam sees a Marmokum in Sukkot Avlamehem Beis, if you don't mind, in your spare time. Divrei HaMaskol Harei Yeshba. What do you say? What?
Read it ice, please, Does.
I can't hear.
Please read ice to Marmukim now. It's okay whether you sent it or not. It doesn't matter. Just
okay, thank you.
Explain to us.
There's it's a very simple thing. On Lamed Hamid Beis, I'm just asking a third kash on that before I get to the Ikaraya. Just a ha'ara. On Lamed Hamid Beis, Rashi says that Truma is called you have a heter achila. So Rashi says, why is Truma called you have heter achila if you have an esrik? So Rashi says on Lamed Hamid Beis, because a kohen's allowed to eat. What about a Yisrael? A kohen's allowed to eat Truma. What about a Yisrael? So he says the case is where a Yisrael bought truma from a kohen. Okay, so the Yisrael bought truma from a kohen, but he's not allowed to eat it. He's allowed to give it to his grandson, who's a kohen, the son of his daughter. And since he bought the truma from a kohen, and he's allowed to give it to his grandson, that's called he has a heter achila. That's called he has a usage. That's all. Rashi says on Lamed Hem Beis in Sukkah that truma is called a heter achila, obviously for a kohen, and even for Yisrael, because if a Yisrael bought truma from a kohen, he can feed it to his grandson, who's a kohen, the son of his daughter. And it's called he has a heter achila, he has usage. He can feed it to the family. I never understood the Rashi. Why does Rashi have to be such a convoluted case that he bought truma from a kohen and he gives it to his grandson? Why doesn't he just say that he was mafresh truma and he gives it to his grandson, the kohen? Rashi's trying to explain why truma is called a heter achila, both for a kohen and for Yisrael. So it's called a heter truma for the kohen. Kohen's allowed to eat truma, obviously, and it's called a heter achila for Yisrael because Yisrael, even though albeit it's true he can't eat it himself, but he can give it to his grandson. Okay, so why does Rashi have to say that he bought the truma from the? Why does he have to say that he bought the truma from the kohen? Let him just say that he was mafresh truma and he gave it to his grandson. I think that the answer obviously is because if he was mafresh the truma, it's not his, and it has to be called lochem. You have to own it. Besides owning it, you have to have a heter achila also. If the Avnei Miluim will be correct that all you need is a heter achila, but you don't need ownership at all, there will be no need for the Rashi to say that I acquire truma from a kohen and then I'm going to go feed it to my grandson. It would be enough to say that I was mafresh my own truma, albeit I don't own it because it belongs to the shevet hakahuna, but it's a heter achila because I'm feeding my grandson. Why does he have to say that I acquire truma and then I'm going to feed it to my grandson? L'chayr is mefurish in Rashi that the ability to feed it to your grandson, what we call the heter achila, is not enough for lochem. Rather, you have to own the truma. And in order to own the truma, the only way a yid can own the truma is by buying the truma from a kohen. That's a diuk in the Rashi, but a nice diuk, if you don't mind me saying so. Not like the Avnei Miluim, that it's not enough the heter achila alone. Rather, you have to own it. So, my Rabbi say, I bought now 3 rayas that l'chayra. I bought now 3 rayas. Okay, I brought now 3 rayas into whether or not you have to own it. Avnei Miluim said you don't have to own it. All you have to have is edibility. I asked one kasha from Matan Manas Lahav there. I asked the second question from Ahu Yanuka, where obviously the question is a mistake because Avnei Miluim didn't miss such a Gemara, but I don't know what the mistake is. Why do I have to give it to the Yanuka? Why does the Yanuka have to give it back to me? And my third diak is a nice diak from a Rashi in Lamed Hem Beis, who says that truma is called edible for the Yisrael because he gives it to his enikol, but only if he bought the truma, not if he was mafresh the truma himself. Vice says that it's not enough to have a heter achila, you have to own it. Okay. But all that pales to the Iker Kasha on the Avnei Miluim. Have a Raya Muchachas not like him. What did the Avnei Miluim say? My Rabbi say. The Avnei Miluim came along and said that the Rambam, there was a steer in the Rambam. The Rambam paskins Ma'aseh Sheni is Mamon Gavoya. And by the same token, the Rambam says you're allowed to use Ma'aseh Sheni for Daled Minim. So what did he answer? He said, you don't have to own it. He said, you do not have to own it. Okay? You don't have to own it. All you have to do is edibility. And Ma'aseh Sheni is edible. So I asked the question, and now I'm going to get to the heart. I asked, okay, but there's a din that shol and guzzle is no good. The answer is shol and guzzle is no good because it's not edible. That's the answer. Again, if the Avnei Miluim is correct, that a person doesn't have to own it, and that's what he said pshat in the Rambam, that's why Ma'aseh Sheni is good, even though it's Mamon Gavoya, even though you don't own it. So then, there's no way in the world that shol and guzzle is no good. So why is shol and guzzle no good? The answer is you don't own it. Who cares? The answer is, but it's not edible. So the only reason why shol and guzzle is no good is because it's not edible. Now, that pshat is pashit mefurish in the Rambam, not like that. I'll tell you a dover nifla mamish. The Rambam paskins in Perak Chas Lochates, and here's where we're going to have to part ways with the Mahalach of the Avnei Miluim, at least in the Rambam. It could be that it's pshat in the Gemara as mechudishdik as it is, but in the Rambam it's not going to go. The Rambam paskins in Perak Chas Lochates, Hilchos Lulav, as follows: Kol elu shamarnu shem psulin. B'pnei mumin, a gezel, geneva, b'yontav rishon b'vad. Things which are possible because of gezel or geneva, that's only b'yontav rishon. Things which are possible because esrog is asur ba'achila. Things which are possible because of asur ba'achila, that applies to all 7 days. The Rambam makes a split, and the Rambam says that the din of esrog, which is asur ba'achila, the din of heter achila is a psul which applies all 7 days, and the psul of lachem is only on the first day. What's the hezbollah, by the way? Why is the psul of heter achila on all 7 days, and the psul of lachem of gazel on the first day? So the Rambam in Pirush Mishnayos on the Mishnah of Esrog HaGazel, the Rambam in Mishnah Hay in the Pirush Mishnayos explains that the reason why something which is asur ba'achila, which is not edible, is possible, is not because of lachem, but rather his lashon is lefichach hu pasol l'mayim Hashem yisbarach pri ve'elu einu royal achir b'shum panim, and he says that it's lacking a shem pri. That means esrog has to be a pre-eitz hadar, and the criteria for peiros is something which is edible. Let's go to the lumdas right away. The not edibility, which is a chisaron in the chefts of the esrog, because it's not edible be'etzim, so it lost its shem pri. About it lost its shem pri, that's obviously a chisaron all 7 days of yontav, because it's a chisaron the etzim shem pre-eitz hadar. There's no reason why it's possible the first day. It's not an esrog. Okay, I'll say it bluntly. Pre-eitz hadar is not an esrog. If it's not a pre, and if it's not edible, it's not called a pre. So about it applies to all 7 days. The psul of lachem is only the first day. So it's explicit in the Rambam, Moriv Rabbi say, that the din of heter achila or / isser achila is a psul all 7 days because it's a chisaron in the shem pre, and the psul of gazel, which is a psul of lachem, is only the first day. By the way, if you'll ask me, so why doesn't the psul of gazel have a psul of not edibility? Hello, you can't eat it. The answer is that's not a chisaron in the shem pri. That's not coming from the problem of the chefza. Something's only called a lack of a shem pri when the object itself is not edible. When the reason why it's not edible is because of outside reasons, that's not a reason why it's lacking pri, and therefore the reason is lochem. B'kitzur, Rabbi Say is meforsh in the Rambam black on white that the psul of lochem of the first day and the psul of edibility are two different psulim. One of them only applies to the first day, and the other one applies to all 7 days. If so, here's where we part ways with Avnei William. So it's muchach in a raya she'eino le'tshuva. It's muchach in the Rambam that the psul of shol and gazel is not the psul of edibility, because the psul of edibility applies all 7 days because it's a lack of pri. The psul of gazel only applies the first day. So if the two psulim are not the same psul, it means obviously the psul of shol and gazel is not because it's not edible, but rather because it's not yours. If so, comes back to kasha, a steer in the Rambam. So first of all, it's a raya against Avnei William. You can't go tell me that the only criteria is edibility, where the rule of edibility of heter achila is for 7 days and the din of lachem is for 1 day. So that ends the shtickle of the Avnei William that there's only one criteria. The problem now is in the Rambam himself. Now it comes back to the famous steer of the Rambam. The Rambam paskins that ma'aseh sheni momon gavoya. That means it's not yours. And the Rambam paskins that you're allowed to use ma'aseh sheni for what? You're allowed to use ma'aseh sheni for dalad minim. The kasha is that it's not yours. So what did the Avnei William answer? Moed Rabbi say. The Avnei William answered that it doesn't have to be yours as long as it's edible. Shol and gazel is no good. The also the problem is that it's not edible. But in the Rambam it can't be. It can't be that the problem of shol and gazel that's not edible, because the Rambam passing shol and gazel is possible 1 day. The dinner of not edibility is possible all 7 days. So it's clear that the psul of shol and gazel is a different psul. So then comes back the question: if the psul of shol and gazel is not the psul of edibility, but rather the psul is because it's not yours, and that's why it only applies 1 day. So how could the Rambam paskin lahalacha that ma'aseh sheni, which is mom gavaya, is good for dalad minim? The teretz of the Avnei William is very nice that he said that it doesn't have to be yours. Maybe that's shot in the Gemara there, but the Rambam clearly didn't hold like that, because the Rambam holds that the psul of guzzle is not because it's not edible, because that psul will be all 7 days. The answer is that something which is guzzle is called edible. So what is the psul only for 1 day? It means if the psul of guzzle would be because it's not edible, then it would apply all 7 days. The answer is that it's not called not edible, and the reason is, like I'm explaining, because the psul of not edibility is because it's not a shem pri. That's only when the isser achila stems from the object itself. When the reason why the zach is asur b'achila is because its tamu was stolen, that's not called asur b'achila. So the psul of isser achila you don't have, because that taka applies 7 days. Something which is stolen is not called isser achila, it's called mutar b'achila be'etzem. So what is the psul of guzzle? The psul is because it's not yours. So then comes back to kasha, about it's muchrach in the Rambam, that the psul of isser achila is not the reason why there's a psul of guzzle, because that applies 7 days and guzzle only applies 1 day. So obviously the psul of guzzle is not because it's asur b'achila. That means here I'm bringing out the power of the Anulim. The Anulim had to learn that the reason why guzzle is puzzle is because it's not edible. Because the Anulim holds there is no other criteria. It doesn't have to be yours. So why in the world is guzzle also? It must be because it's not edible. But the Rambam can hold that's the psul of guzzle, because he says the psul of not edibility is for 7 days, and guzzle is only puzzle for 1 day. So why taka is only 1 day? Why don't you say that it's not edible? Obviously it's called edible. It's called that it has a heter achila. So then why is it puzzle that it has a heter achila for 1 day? Because it's not called yours. So then comes back to kasha, if it's muchach in the Rambam that he holds that the din of lochem is not because of not edibility, because of isra achila, rather there's a din of has to be yours, and that's why it only applies 1 day, because it's not a lack of the pri. So how could a person use ma'aser sheni? Mama gavaya, it's not yours. This is a raya to a famous yisoid. So we have to look for a new teretz in the steer of the Rambam, not the teretz of the Avdim Elohim. What we're going to say is, this Rambam is a famous raya to a famous yisoid that Reb Chaim said. A very interesting yisoid, a fascinating yisoid. And it has ramifications to the etzim pshat of this Gemara in Sukkot Daf Lamed Hey as follows. Lo'ilam, avada and avada and avada, it has to be yours. No question about it. And that's why Gozel and Shol is not Lochem, you're not Yaitza with it. And that's why nobody ever printed, besides this Avnim Meluyim, that the reason why Gozel and Shol is no good because it's not edible, the reason why Gozel and Shol is no good because it's not yours because you don't own it. Aye. So why is Moras Masa Sheni good? The Gemara says explicitly, it's Momon Gavoya Rameir, and yet it's kosher for Dalaminim. Why? So there's a famous Biskarov. The Biskarov is brought down B'Shem Reb Chaim. It's in the stencil, in the Ksavim, in the Vavim and Aleph, in Zvochim. Divrei HaMaskal Elameato. Biskarov is in the Ksavim, the stencil, in Zvochim, the Vavim and Aleph, Divrei HaMaskal Elameato. It's also brought down in the Torah's Roim on Ma'aseh Sheni, Talmud of the Biskarov, B'Shem Reb Chaim. Reb Chaim said a Morid de Kazach, which is a complete game changer in the sugya. The Rambam says in Perek Hei Halacha Daled, the Rambam says in Perek Hei Halacha Daled Hilchos Ishus. The Rambam says in Perek Hei Halacha Daled Hilchos Ishus, I quote, Kitcha b'Ma'aseh Sheni, if you're Mekadosh a lady with Ma'aseh Sheni, Eina Mekudeshes. Why not? Fishein lo ilasa is boishar chafotz of achi ischalo. You're not allowed to use the Ma'aseh Sheni for any of your private needs until you do chilul, until you redeem it. Reb Chaim, very strange Rambam. Why is the Rambam such a convoluted lashon that the reason why the lady is not mekudesh is because you're not allowed to use the Ma'aseh Sheni for any other usages other till you do chilul. The Rambam should say Ma'aseh Sheni mamon gavoya. It's not yours. Period. Although the Rambam paskins, as we said earlier, that Ma'aseh Sheni is mamon gavoya. If you bought Ma'aseh Sheni is mamon gavoya, so it's not yours, and you can't be mekadosh a lady with money that's not yours. Why does the Rambam have to say such a lashon? Zokta Chaim, Amori de Kazach. Chaim says that the pshat is as follows. State in this Rambam, the Biskarov brings down that be'etzem Ma'aseh Sheni Momon Gavoya is yours. You own it. But Chaim says over there, the Biskarov brings down, I'm adding this on in parentheses, that Ma'aseh Sheni is so much yours that if a guy dies, his kids yarshin it. Now, you can't yarshin something which you don't own. But Chaim said, the Biskarov brought down that there's Yerusha by Ma'aseh Sheni. Ait Momon Gavoya does not mean that you don't own it. You own it monetarily. Wise, you own it. At kedekach that the kids could yarshin it. Shocking. That's what the Biskarov brings down. That's what the Torah brings down. So why can't you encourage a lady? That's what the Rambam said. The kedusha of the object of the Ma'aseh Sheni requires that you should only utilize it for the intended usage of the kedusha. Mama Gavoya doesn't mean that you don't own it. Mama Gavoya means that it's kadosh for the usage of Gavoya, which is to eat. And that's what it means. The Rambam said, the Gavoya limits it that it cannot be utilized for anything else other than its intended purposes of Gavoya, which is to be eaten in Yerushalayim. And you don't have reshus to use it for anything else. So the reason why the lady is not Mekudesh is not because you don't own the object, but rather the object is only yours to be used for what it is intended. The lashon of the Brisker Rav is, I'm not quoting the lashon of the, what do you call it, of the, it's not a diak, but his lashon is that what's printed over here is that you can't give or sell it or do kedushin with it. Who didn't bechayfetz atzmim mitzat kedushas ma'aseh sheni she'ein noi bidin limocher v'litin matana v'le mitzat chisaron bailus. It's not a lack of bailus. It's not a lack of bailus b'chal. It's not a lack of bailus in the gavra. It's a din in the cheftza that the din of the cheftza is that it can't be sold. It can't be given as a matana, because it is intended for other usage. And that's why the Rambam says, mamash, an astounding thing, Reb Chaim was medayik, that a person can be mekadosh a lady with Ma'aseh Sheni, said Reb Chaim, not because it's not yours. The Rambam should have said 3 words. Ma'aseh Sheni, Mama Goodbye, it's not yours, and goodbye, finished. You can't be mekadosh a lady with something that's not yours. Zok the Rambam name. Zok the Rambam that the din of Ma'aseh Sheni is because if he she'ein lo lasot b'shar chafotzav ad sheyischal. The Brisker Rav over there brings down the Reb Chaim said, he quoted a Rambam in Hilchos Ma'aseh Sheni, per Gimel Halacha Chav Daled, in Hilchos Ma'aseh Sheni, per Gimel Halacha Chafei, the last halacha, it says, Hamagdish Ma'aseh Sheni shaloi levedek habayis. You could be Magdish Ma'aseh Sheni. Here, Ma'aseh, in fact, Reb Chaim, how can you be Magdish Ma'aseh Sheni? It's not yours. He said Reb Chaim, because it's yours. So Reb Chaim bought 3 nafkaminas of Ma'aseh Sheni Mama Gavoya. One is your children could yarshin it. 2, you could be magdish it, like it's Meforsh in the Rambam, Perek Gimel Hilchos Ma'aseh Sheni Halacha Chafei. And Be'ikr in the Rambam says the reason why the kedusha is not chal is not because you don't own it, it's not because you're lacking bailos, but it's a din mitzad the cheftza that the cheftza's kedusha doesn't allow it to be used for any other usage other than its usage of eating, not to be used for making kedushin and demanding a kedushin in return for it. I'm responding to the person who asked me the question. Using it to buy a kedushin for a lady is another usage other than the gavoya dika usage, and therefore you cannot make kedushin with it. Oh, if so, it comes out from this Reb Chaim. The Brisker Rav brought down a dov and neira that be'etzem ma'aseh sheni you own. Mela, I want to say that punkt fakir, not like the Avnei Uluim. Avada and Avada and Avada and Avada, you need that it has to be lochem. And Shol and Gozel is no good because you need to own it. That's the baseline. And that's before anything starts. The topic of, and Ma'aseh Sheni is called yours, Kimedubru, like we just said over to Reb Chaim. And that's the steer to the Rambam. The Rambam passes Ma'aseh Sheni Momon Gavoya, so how can you use it for Lulav and Esrik? The answer is it's yours. Although you're not using it for any other, you're just holding it. That's not a steer to the usage of Ma'aseh Sheni. So since Ma'aseh Sheni, you own it, you can certainly use it. In Yerushalayim, we have a heter achila. So, by the way, I just want to speak out something. Why can't I be mekadosh a lady with it and I can use it for lulav? Because being mekadosh a lady with it, where I'm buying something with it, I'm using it for a different usage other than its intended purpose. By dalad minim, what I'm doing is I'm holding it. That's not called a different usage. Therefore, the Rambam paskins a new teretz. The Avnei Uluim said that the reason why you're allowed to use Ma'aseh Sheni for dalad minim is because you don't have to own the dalad minim. And we're saying, of course, you have to own the dalad minim. That's why Gozel's no good. You have to have lochem. Just the Gemara Lamed Hey is talking about another din. Besides owning it, you also have to have a heter achila. It's not enough to own it, but own it is the baseline. That's the Gemara Malcham base. That's why nobody connects the two sugis. Of course, you have to own it. Of course, you have to own it. What's the Gemara Lamed Hey about? The Gemara Lamed Hey is raising the bar and saying that besides owning it, you also have to have a heter achila. You have to have a higher level of lachem. But Avad, you have to own it. How could the Rambam and the Gemara say that Ma'aseh Sheni Mamon Gavoya allowed to use it? Because you own Ma'aseh Sheni Mamon Gavoya. Like Reb Chaim was medayik. All this is not like the Avnei Uluim who built his whole yisoid based on this yisoid. Now, this whole shtickle Torah that I said, we're going to call it a machlekes with avnim miluyim, whether or not heter achila alone is the criteria, and you don't have to own it, or like we're saying that avad you have to own it, and then I have to come on to this huge chiddush of Reb Chaim that Ma'aseh Sheni you own, is totally mamish in a basic shot in the Gemara over there in Sukkah Lamed Hey. I want to say adova noyer mamish. The Gemara over there says in Sukkah Lamed Hey, Orl is possible. Says the Gemara, why is Orl apostle? Because you don't have a heter achila. So I have a very simple question. Something which is asur hana, is it called yours or not? You all know. Ktsois and Simen Tav Vav Sifkat and Beis. You all know that the Ktsois and Simen Tav Vav Sifkat and Beis. You all know that the Ktsois says in Simen Tav Vav Sifkat and Beis, and in many other places, Kler Chakira, something which is asur b'hana, is it called Eina Shaloi or it's called Eina B'Shusai? There are a lot of rayas that something which is asur b'hana, which I can't utilize, is completely mufka my bailas. It's called Eina Shaloi. It's totally in a girsa and Rashi and Psachim. Or something which is asur b'hana, it's Eina B'Shusai. It's not under my jurisdiction. It's not under my domination, but it's called mine. So I'm going to say something very blunt. Moirav Rabbi say, if something which is asur b'hana is called Eina Shaloi, so why does the Gemara have to look for new reasons why Orla is puzzle? It's not yours. Why does the Gemara have to say that it's asur b'achila, it's mutar b'achila? That would be an incredible raya to the avnim miluyim. Halei Orla is asur b'hana. If Isser Hana is Eina Shaloi, if something which is asur b'hana is called Yemufka the Bailas and Gansim because you have no usage, so then it's a Mefurish more like the Avnim Miluyim. I agree. All is asur b'hana. It's not yours at all. You don't have Bailas in it. It's completely Mufka your ownership. And yet the Gemara goes into a discussion about heter achila, not heter achila. Who cares? It's not yours. The ball game's over. Why is it better than Shol and Gazel? So that would be an incredible riot to the Avnim Miluyim, that you don't have to own it. There's only one agenda. Heter achila, not heter achila. That's nifla moed. But if we're taking on, like we're proving from the Rambam, not like the Avnei Miluyim, that you certainly have to own it. That you certainly have to own it. So then, and the agenda of heter achila or isser achila is an added requirement. So if Orla is called Eina Shaloi, what do you have to begin the journey? The teretz is, it's like the other side of the Ktsois and other Achroinim, that Orla is called Shaloi. Just as Eina B'Shusai, Beseder. It could be Eina B'Shusai is called Lachem. So if every Orla is called, if every Isser Hana is called Eina Shaloi, so then it's a Mefurish more like Avnim Miluyim. That even though it's Eina Shaloi, the criteria is Heter Achila, Isser Achila. If we want to say, like we're saying, that it has to be Shaloi, because that's Shol and Gozel, that's the baseline Lochem, like we prove from the Rambam. So then I'm going to have to learn, so then I have a kasha. Why does the Gemara have to begin a discussion of Heter Achila, Isser Achila, Ba'ala? The Gemara should say, it's asur b'hana, it's not yours, goodbye Charlie. So it's a right that Orla is called yours. It's asur b'hana. Isser Hana is only called Eina B'Shusai, it's not called Eina Shaloi. But the Avnim Miluyim, if he went with those Kadmoinim who held, yes, he brings down a Rivash over there in Tofel about this topic, that something which is asur b'hana is called Eina Shaloi, and yet the Gemara begins the discussion of Heter Achila, Isser Achila. So then it's a Mefurish Gemara that he's right, that you don't have to own it, all you need to have is to have a Heter Achila. If we're taking on not like him, then I have a big mitzvah over here. This Gemara is a gold mine. If I'm taking on that our Mahalach is right, that Avad, and the way all the Gedolei learned all the years, like we proved from the Rambam, that you have to own it. So then I have a kasha. So why is the Gemara hacking a cup with Isra Achila, Heter Achila? Let the Gemara say that it's not yours. It's a raya that something which is asur b'hana is yours, just as Eina B'Shusai. And it could be that something which is Eina B'Shusai you're allowed to use for Esrik, which is a separate topic for itself. That's the psicha to this very, very fascinating and controversial Avnim Miluyim, with all the ramifications that come with it. I was thinking that it's a Morid Gazach to learn Hilchos Dalad Minim the first weeks of El. Chazal say that, the Medrash says that we're betuchim, that when Rosh Hashanah is going to come, we're beteach in HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that because we're going to do tshuva, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is going to give us a good year. And learning Hilchos Sukkah already a month and a half before it means that we're relying on the good graces of HaKadosh Baruch Hu to give us a ksiva v'chasima toiva and a good gebenz jar to everybody and to all of Klal Yisrael. Kol tov.